Which wide receiver will the Jets draft, and how much of a priority will offensive line be? We have the latest projections. It's Mock Draft Monday on today's episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, April 18th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com, thanking you for making this show your first listen or your first watch every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit that subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Our episode today is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, today we're going to have another Mock Draft Monday episode. We did that last Monday. I thought it was a pretty good episode. And the reason I like to look at mock drafts at this time of the year is not because they're always accurate figuring out who the Jets are going to pick or who's going to be available, but they give you a broad sense typically of how the league values players. There's always a guy who maybe goes a little bit higher than people are expecting. There's always a guy who goes a little bit lower than people are expecting. But broadly, the mock drafts kind of tell you where players are valued across the league. And we're going to go through 3 mock drafts today that have come out over the last week. I think they offer different insights into what we might expect the Jets to do, depending on what scenarios play out. A little over a week away as the 2022 NFL Draft is upon us. So I'm going to begin today. We're going to look at a mock draft Mel Kiper Jr. of ESPN put out last week. And this is interesting. It's a 2-round mock. And of course, the Jets have 4 of the top 40 picks. So there were 4 players Mel Kiper mocked to the Jets. And at 4, this one is kind of a chalk pick. It's a player that a lot of people think will end up with the New York Jets. It's Kayvon Thibodeau, the defensive end out of Oregon. And I think it's pretty obvious. Defensive end's a pretty high priority for this team right now. Number 1, defensive line play is very important in Robert Saleh's defense. In fact, it's the thing he prioritized probably above all else as he builds his defense out. We saw that last year with the way the Jets prioritized the defensive line in free agency when they signed Carl Lawson, also quietly signed Vinny Curry, who was very easy to forget about because his Jets career ends without him ever playing a snap for the team because he was injured the whole year. But Curry, I think, was an addition the Jets were looking to hoping that they would get more production out of him than they got, which of course it would be possible to get less production out of Vinny Curry than the Jets got. But I think they were expecting him to be a role player in this defense. They brought in Sheldon Rankins last year also in the offseason. I think they were hoping he and Quinnen Williams would be a great 1-2 punch at the defensive tackle position. So, last year things did not work out that well for the Jets because Lawson was injured the whole year, Curry was injured the whole year, Rankins really wasn't that great. But it shows you that even though they pretty much swung and missed at all their free agent signings, it shows you that they did prioritize the defensive line. Now, you look at the team this year, you have Lawson returning, but the guy across from Lawson's just as much of a mystery as it was this time last year. We really didn't know who was going to play defensive end for the Jets. Ended up being a lot of John Franklin Myers that they went big at the defensive end position. But I think it's, at least in passing downs, even if Franklin Myers is going to stay at defensive end, and we don't know that he is, he may slide in more to defensive tackle, or he may mix and match. Maybe we'll see him some spots at defensive end, some spots at defensive tackle, but you don't have that natural pass rusher across from Carl Lawson. And Kayvon Thibodeau seems like a natural fit. I don't think there are a lot of people who are going to question his talent. If he's there at 4, just based on talent, that's going to be a very difficult player to pass up. So Kayvon Thibodeau, Mel Kiper's pick at 4. I don't think it's particularly controversial, at least if we're talking about just pure skill set and pure need and pure fit for the team on the field. There are questions about Thibodeau's process, his pre-draft process this year, whether that's dropping him down the boards because he was a consensus top 2 pick, it felt like, at the end of the season. So there are questions there, but Kayvon Thibodeau, Kiper has him going to the Jets at 4. At 10, Kiper mocks Drake London to the Jets, the big wide receiver. And I think most people heading into this draft kind of view these top 10 picks in an ideal world. One of them is going to be defensive end because that's maybe the top priority on defense. And on the offensive side of the ball, the top priority is obviously getting a wide receiver to help Zach Wilson out. because the Jets are kind of lacking at the receiver position right now, with Elijah Moore returning after missing the last couple of games last season. He was coming on strong prior to that point, so Elijah Moore, a very promising player. Corey Davis, a guy who I honestly am kind of expecting a bounce-back season from. I think people are a little too down on him. If he bounces back to his normal career levels that he posted with Tennessee, he'll be a solid receiver. But you don't really have a go-to guy in this offense. And we know the Jets tried this offseason. They tried to trade for Tyreek Hill. Depending on which reports you're listening to, they may have been in on another guy or two who got traded, another guy or two who hadn't been traded. But Drake London is my guess for who Joe Douglas would draft if he had his choice of the receivers, just because doing research on Joe Douglas's past draft history, it always seems to me he favors bigger receivers. Now, he'll make an exception for a guy who just has incredibly blazing speed, like an Elijah Moore. Not every receiver Joe Douglas drafts is really big, but unless you have that blazing speed, Joe Douglas typically favors the big receiver, which makes me feel like, even though Garrett Wilson obviously ran a very fast 40 time, I feel like he's going to favor Drake London over Garrett Wilson if he has the choice. So Drake London to the Jets at 10. And by the way, in this mock, Garrett Wilson did go to Atlanta at 8, so he didn't have the choice. But I feel like even if Wilson's on the board, my personal guess is that Drake London's going to be the choice. Now, what's interesting here is what follows, because Kiper actually has the Jets trading back into the first round for a third first-round pick, and all they gave up was a fourth-round pick. Now, trade-ups are very tricky, especially when you're only trading up a couple slots, because you want to have as many picks as possible. The draft is very inexact science. The teams that draft the best tend to be the teams that with the most picks. So when you're trading up, you're sacrificing picks. In this spot, though, I feel like you could justify a trade-up for the Jets because you still have excess draft capital. You're still walking away with 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. So losing a fourth-round pick for the Jets probably doesn't have the impact it would for a team with a normal assortment of draft capital. So it's one of those situations. I'm typically not in favor of trade-ups, but I feel like when you have extra picks, you can play around a little bit. You can really target guys that you want, especially if you think that they're not going to be available if you wait for them at your pick. And the Jets are trading up. This is interesting because their third first-round pick in the Kiper mock is a center, Tyler Linderbaum, out of Iowa. Now, Connor McGovern's a very solid player. In fact, I named him a couple months ago. I named him my Jets Player of the Year in 2021. So this is an intriguing pick, and I'm not sure what happens from here if the Jets pick Linderbaum, because they could very well sit Linderbaum for a year, let him develop. They could also look to trade McGovern, who, approaching 30 and entering the last year of his contract. He's not a guarantee for the Jets to be here in 2023. I think that this would be an unpopular move because, first of all, you're trading up, but second of all, you're trading up for a guy who doesn't have an obvious pathway to start for this team unless you make a move. I think there would be questions. Is Linderbaum, even if he's better than McGovern, which you don't know, is Linderbaum enough of an improvement that you pass on other players at more pressing positions of need? That's the perception people will have. I'm not particularly sympathetic to that argument because I don't think you draft players for their year one impact. I think you draft players to have guys who are going to be good for your team for 8 to 10 years. McGovern's not going to be here 8 to 10 years. Very good chance McGovern's only here one more year anyway. So it's a move that could conceivably solidify the center position for a long time to come. And if you're a long-time listener of this podcast, you know my rants about how the Jets have completely messed up the center position through the year. Not so much with McGovern the last year, but prior to that stretch where we had to watch Wesley Johnson and Jonathan Harrison and Ryan Khalil, Spencer Long. I mean, it was horrible. It destroyed the offense. McGovern's come in and stabilized things. And if you draft Linderbaum, I think the hope is that you've stabilized the offense for a very long time, at least at that position. You can argue, well, it's not enough of an immediate upgrade, but the question that I always ask in these situations is, 10 years from now, is anybody going to care that the Jets did not have an immediate need at the center position? No. Linderbaum, if the Jets made this move, he would be judged essentially on whether or not he was a good player, because you never remember. Everybody always obsesses at the time of the draft over what the immediate needs are, but in the long run, you never say a pick was good or bad because of what the needs were for a team. It's almost always about the play. I mean, you can come up with a few exceptions like Leonard Williams when the Jets were full of defensive linemen, but for the most part, I mean, I'd say 95% of cases, you don't really care what the immediate needs were. I mean, did the Jets have a needed corner when Darrelle Revis was drafted? You probably don't remember. They actually did, but you don't remember. And that's not the reason the pick was a good pick. The reason the pick was a good pick was because of the quality of the player. So I think this would not be a popular move. I'm not sure it's a bad move, though, for the Jets. And then finally, this is a 2-round mock draft at 38 with the pick the Jets got from Carolina for Sam Darnold. This is a fascinating one. The Jets picked Breece Hall, a running back out of Iowa State. I'm not sure I would expect that because I'm not sure Joe Douglas prioritizes the running back position enough to draft somebody in the early second round. I got to say, though, I would not hate the pick. And I am usually Mr. Do not overdraft running backs. I'm usually Mr. Let's not take a running back early. Breece Hall looks like a really potentially special player at the running back position. And beyond that, I look at this Jets team, and even if you drafted Drake London or Garrett Wilson or, one of the other receivers, Chris Olave, you name your favorite receiver, Treylon Burks, whoever you want. Is that good? Is this passing attack good enough that you can build this team, you can build this offense through the passing game? I don't know. I mean, it's a lot to ask. You're going with a lot of unproven guys. I like Elijah Moore. You could draft a very talented player. How much are they going to contribute as a rookie? Zach Wilson's still very much in the early stages of his development. Can you really build this offense through the passing attack? So the other option would be you draft a Breece Hall. And suddenly you have a very dynamic 1-2 punch at the running back position. Breece Hall, I think, is a good fit for the Jets because as much as people want to talk about Michael Carter needing a power back to pair with him, I don't agree. Michael Carter's been decent in power situations. There's small sample sizes across the board, but pretty much every conceivable power situation I've seen, Michael Carter's been pretty solid. He hasn't been a weak at the very least. He hasn't been a weakness in power situations. But he doesn't. I don't think he has that extra gear though, which Breece Hall has. So this especially goes if you draft a Linderbaum. You hopefully upgrade the offensive line. You lean on the offensive line and you lean on your running back duo, and you run the ball and you put Zach Wilson in favorable situations. You kind of take the pressure away from him, and maybe that's the way you build the offense. Maybe that's the way you develop the quarterback. So I actually wouldn't hate this. This is maybe the one situation where you're drafting a running back relatively early, and it's not top 10, it's early second round. But I don't really dislike this one as much as I usually would. I usually would be very anti-running back top 40, but this is a situation where you look at the player, you look at the fit for the Jets potentially. I think he's a good fit in the Jets running scheme. I don't know if Joe Douglas is going to do it because I don't know that Joe Douglas in any situation is going to draft a running back this early, but I don't think it would be an awful move. So that's one potential outcome Mel Kiper lays out. But there are other possibilities. And ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to take a look at another mock draft, which sends the Jets a player early, a very talented player, but not a player at a particularly pressing position of need. And I'll talk about that ahead here on this Monday episode. Today we're talking about mock drafts. We're laying out various scenarios for the New York Jets in the NFL draft, which is coming up next week. And you should know that BetOnline remains your number one spot for all your sports betting stats and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. And even though it's the offseason, even though we're approaching the NFL draft, you can bet on the NFL, you can bet on the Jets. There are plenty of prop bets about where players will be drafted, which player is favored to go number one overall, who will be there for the Jets at 4. And you can also bet on the upcoming season. Jets over under right now, 5.5 wins. If you think the Jets are going to have a good season, you can put some money down, make some money if the Jets are successful this year. Bet online, where the game starts. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen every day. Now for a big announcement. Starting Thursday, April 28th, tune into Locked On NFL Drafts, live coverage of the 2022 NFL Draft, with all 3 days of real-time analysis from our extensive lineup of experts and insiders. And for those of you dying to know who your team will take, catch Odyssey and Locked On's NFL Mock Draft special, hosted by Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson of the Peacock and Williamson NFL show all week leading up to the first pick. May even see a friend of yours appear on a couple of these shows I'm talking about. But on today's episode of Locked On Jets, we're going through some recent mock drafts just to get a broad idea of who the Jets may pick, who might be available when they are up in the NFL draft. The next mock draft I'm going to go through is one that was just put out by Pro Football Focus. And this has the Jets going down kind of a different path from the consensus. At pick 4, they take Sauce Gardner, the corner out of Cincinnati. And much like trading up for an offensive lineman in the Kiper mock draft, I think that this one would raise some eyebrows because if you look at position groups on the Jets, corner is not necessarily an overwhelming strength. It's not the kind of position group that other teams are going to stay up at night, try and figure out how they get their receivers open. But relative to the rest of the roster, this cornerback group looks pretty good with Bryce Hall and DJ Reed on the outside. Now, inside with Michael Carter II, I'm a Michael Carter II fan, but not everybody is. So to be fair, there are some people who are skeptical of him. But if you draft Sauce Gardner, he's not playing inside. He's an outside corner. He's going to probably take one starting spot. DJ Reed's going to take the other starting spot. You send Bryce Hall to the bench. And people are going to object to that because Bryce Hall played well last year. For me, I'm not going into this draft with the mindset that I need to replace Bryce Hall. I'm not saying Bryce Hall is a weakness. I'd be perfectly fine with him as a starting corner for the Jets in 2022. But my mindset's that Bryce Hall's not so good that if I have the opportunity to draft a legitimate shutdown corner, that I'm going to pass on it. And this is a little tricky because there's not really if edge rushers go early in the NFL draft, because I think at 4 they're like the natural fit for the Jets based on where the board lies, based on what they're looking for. The natural fit is really edge rusher. But the problem is this PFF mock draft, Aiden Hutchinson went 1, Kayvon Thibodeau went 2, and Trayvon Walker went 3. So those are like the top 3 edge rushers. They're all gone. So then you kind of have to turn to a position if you want to get good value, at least according to the most big boards. If you want to get good value, you're going to have to go to a position where the Jets are relatively strong, which is either offensive line or corner. And I feel like in the NFL, corner is just one of those positions you can never have too many of. You can never have too many quality corners. But beyond that, a shutdown corner has become a very rare commodity in this league. Partially because of the rules, partially because of schematic changes in the NFL. When you have 3 receiver sets, it becomes more difficult to play man-to-man across the board because most teams don't have 3 corners who can play. But when you combine that with the rules changes, there really are not a lot of corners in this league who can stand up one-on-one against another team's receivers all game. And when you have the chance to draft somebody who can legitimately stand up one-on-one against like the other team's number 1 receiver, it's something worth considering, even if it's not necessarily the most glaring short-term need on your roster. So while Sauce Gardner, if the Jets pick him, I think would be a pretty controversial pick, and I think there would be a large segment of the fan base that would be adamantly opposed to it, I can't say that I think it would necessarily be a terrible pick. Now, there was another interesting pick in the PFF mock draft, as they send Jameson Williams to the Jets with the 10th overall pick, and of course that's the pick the Jets got for Jamal Adams a couple of years ago. This is fascinating because I think there's a wide consensus that there should be a wide receiver picked in the first round by the Jets. I certainly feel that way. Jameson Williams is not a name who comes up frequently in this discussion. Probably, there's really one reason for that. It's because he suffered a serious injury in the national championship game, so he's recovering from an ACL tear, which makes you wonder whether he's going to be available. Now, I'm not a doctor. I certainly have not Jameson Williams' doctor, so I can't give you a diagnosis on his condition. I think we all know that ACL tears are not necessarily impossible to come back from. In fact, the recovery rate is relatively high in the NFL. So it's not, you would expect that this is not going to be the type of thing that's going to really disrupt Jameson Williams' career. The question is whether you're going to get immediate help, because that's really what the Jets need at the wide receiver position. They need immediate help for Zach Wilson. They need a plug-and-play guy, which is probably why they tried to make trades in the offseason, at least one trade that we know of, and they were apparently in on some other guys. If you take Jameson Williams, you're not only adding the difficult rookie learning curve, you're also not sure what you're going to get, because it's entirely possible maybe he's ready for training camp, maybe he's ready to contribute on day one, but just from what we know, I don't know that you want to put that on him. I don't know that you want to count on him. I think it's one of those situations where if you get something, if you get production from him, you're very happy to have it, but it's not something you want to count on. I can't say it'd be a bad pick. I mean, Jameson Williams is a really good prospect. And, he's known for his speed more than anything, but he's not just a speed guy. He's not just a guy. This is not like, Stephen Hill's the ultimate example, the guy who just runs fast but has no receiver skills. Jameson Williams has some nuance to his route running. I mean, he knows some of the more nuanced aspects of the receiver position already. He's got some room to grow, but this is not just a guy who's being drafted purely on physical attributes. Now, those help. Those probably got him into the first round, but this is a guy who understands a lot of the aspects of playing receiver. And, it's tough because Zach Wilson needs immediate help, but can you say this would be a bad pick? No, you really can't, because the guy has a lot of talent. The guy could be a big playmaker. You can't even rule out the idea that he could be a contributor as a rookie. It's just not something I think you would necessarily want to count on. So this is another one. If the Jets came away from this draft with Gardner and Williams, there would be a lot of complaints, because with the first pick, you're not addressing a glaring need. With the second pick, you're drafting a guy who may not be able to help you on day one. But even so, you still got two potentially really good players for the long run at two really important positions. So, again, there's going to be a lot of people upset. I don't think I'd be one of them. I think I'd have questions about the broader picture, but with what we're doing at the receiver position, I'd have questions about some of the other spots. But I don't think it would be a bad move. And, of course, going back to Gardner, one of the aspects of this is there's a symbiotic relationship between your pass rush and your coverage units. If you rush the passer well, you don't have to cover as well, because the pass rushers get to the quarterback and your corners don't have to cover for as long. If you have corners who can cover for really well, your pass rush doesn't need to be as good, because the pass rushers have longer to get to the quarterback. So drafting a Gardner could help out the pass rush, and could maybe help compensate for the lack of a defensive end pick. At the receiver position, Jameson Williams, even if you get him on the field at some point this season, we know he's very fast. So even if he still has to, even if he misses training camp, even if he's more limited, even if you have to kind of bring him in easy, he adds a dimension to the offense. I think there's a very good chance he could help in some capacity. I'm not sure he could help the Jets and be a number one receiver right off the bat, but he could probably give you something. He'll probably be ready at some point this season, even if he's not going to give you the total impact you're looking for with Zach Wilson. So, interesting selections by PFF. Would be controversial. I'm not sure they'd be bad. However, ahead on the Locked On Jets podcast, we have one more mock draft, and these selections were actually made by yours truly. So, stick with us to find out who I picked for the Jets in a mock draft I recently participated in. Of course, we are talking about mock drafts today on Locked On Jets. I have to tell you, if there was ever a mock draft for protein bars, Built Bar would be the obvious choice to go number one overall. Built Bar has the best tasting protein bar on the market. Their protein bars, they don't taste like protein bars, though, because they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Bars are all delicious. At Built Bar, they figure out how to make it delicious, and then they figure out how to make it healthy. And they somehow figure out a way to do both all the time. Most bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein, compared with a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. And again, they're delicious. You got so many delicious flavors, from mint brownie to coconut almond. At Built Bar, they make the best tasting protein bars, and they make them healthy. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15. If you do that, you'll get 15% off your order. Again, it's promo code LOCKED15. It's one word with no space, LOCKED, number 1, number 5, for 15% off at Built, BUILT.com. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. We're talking about mock drafts. We talked about Mel Kiper. We've talked about Pro Football Focus. Both recently put out mock drafts. But now I want to tell you about a mock draft I recently participated in. It's with SB Nation, and every year SB Nation has the writers of the team sites participate in a mock draft where we play the general manager of our team. And I'm the Jets writer at SB Nation. I write at a website called Gang Green Nation, so I play the Jets general manager this year. And I made 2 first-round picks for the Jets. At 4, I went offensive line. I picked Ike Mekwonu. Now, I want to make it clear here. When I made this pick, I wasn't drafting the player I would pick in that situation. I was trying to figure out what Joe Douglas would do. So I was drafting with the mindset that I'm Joe Douglas. Now, the first 3 picks in this mock draft were Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Kyle Hamilton. So this came down to Trevon Walker versus Ike Mekwonu. And I felt like Joe Douglas in this situation just wouldn't be able to help himself. And I could see the argument for Walker because, again, he's a defensive end. But He's also kind of a project player, and this actually would create the scenario Robert Saleh was joking about a few weeks ago when he said he made a joke that he was going to fight Joe Douglas, whether it was going to be a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman in the first round, because Saleh loves defensive linemen, and we know Joe Douglas loves offensive linemen. But I feel like at the end of the day, Joe Douglas in this scenario, if Thibodeau's not there and the choice is Walker or Ekwonu, is going to go with the offensive line, because you look at the situation. Even though they've drafted offensive linemen the last 2 years, there's still a lot of question marks on this unit. Can George Fant continue to play at this current pace? What is Mekhi Becton going to give you? Will you be able to re-sign Fant? I mean, both tackle positions have pretty major question marks entering this season. And I feel like Ekwonu is the type of lineman where he just moves people. He has that nasty streak. I think it's going to be difficult for Joe Douglas to pass on him for Trayvon Walker. I think Thibodeau, a guy who's with a little bit more polish, maybe I feel like Thibodeau is going to be the pick at 4 if he's available. But I think if it's between Walker and Ekwonu, I'd go with Ekwonu. So that was why I picked Ekwonu for the Jets at 4. And then at 10, a pick that was just announced today, I went with Drake London. And I go back to what I said a little bit earlier. In this scenario, actually, every single receiver in the draft was available. No receiver had gone in the top 9 picks. So I pretty much had my choices. And it really, in this situation, I think it comes down to Garrett Wilson versus Drake London. And I go back to what I said earlier. I feel like Joe Douglas is going to prioritize the big receiver, the guy with the contested, the guy who's good at contested catches. And I do think Drake London, in that sense, brings maybe an element the Jets were lacking last year. Because Corey Davis came in with a good reputation for making contested catches, but he didn't really show it last year. In fact, the one play that always comes to mind for me was a play against Denver where Zach Wilson did a great job evading pressure, kind of floated to his left, threw a ball down the field. Corey Davis really he had a shot at it at the very least, and it was knocked away from him. That was the play that stuck in my mind. But Corey Davis just really did not add a lot as far as contested catches went last year. I could see Drake London as fit for this offense. He's a big guy, tough to bring down on short passes. If the Jets want to get the ball out quickly, he's a guy you get it into his hands, and he'll be tough to bring down. So decent run after the catch ability. But I go back to the size, the contested catch, his contested catch skills. So I went with Drake London, and it was a tough call, but I felt like Drake London would probably be the choice for the Jets in this draft. Anyway, that's all for our show today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, you see we have a little bit of a different background today as I continue this 2 weeks of travel. But that's all for today. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, if you enjoy the show, subscribe to it. Leave it a 5-star review if you're listening on a podcast source. Big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. It'll help other Jets fans find this channel. Have a great day, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.